Empathy. It's hailed as this cornerstone of great leadership and personal virtue. But what if we've been misled? Everywhere you look, empathy is being celebrated and glorified, but today I'm turning the tables. Are we misunderstanding empathy? And even more crucially, might our well-intentioned embrace of it be fueling societal angst and indecision? Join me as I unravel these wee questions. I'm going to explore the true nature of empathy and challenge the wildly held belief that it is an undisputed force for good in leadership. First things first, let's agree on a definition of empathy, because I think it's often confused with sympathy.
It drives me crazy.
But they're not the same thing. According to Merriam-Webster, and seriously every dictionary you look at, sympathy is a feeling of sincere concern for someone who's experiencing something difficult or painful. Empathy involves actively sharing in the person's emotional experience, like an empath. Now, to get around this inconvenient truth, some are starting to fork empathy into emotional versus cognitive empathy, in which the one you don't feel anything. But really that just serves to remove the empath part from empathy, and all we're stuck with is why.
Why?
So to recap, sympathy is me being concerned that you have fallen down a hole and broken your ankle. Compassion makes me want to find a rope to get you out. Empathy would be me jumping in the hole with you, breaking my ankle and sharing your pain. Personally, I'm team practical compassion, and I'm that way every day. Now, stop. I know what you're doing. You just changed tabs and you're rage Googling because you believe that I've got this wrong. I know this because I have this conversation a lot. But trust me, I'm not. Google all you like. Empathy, being an empath, is feeling what others are feeling in the situation. Don't feel bad though. Even the gurus get it wrong. Here's a clip of MSNGLNK.
You walk into someone's office, someone walks into our office and says, your numbers have been down for the third quarter in a row. You have to pick up your numbers, otherwise I can't guarantee what the future will look like. How inspired do you think that person is to come to work the next day? Here's what empathy looks like. You walk into someone's office, someone walks into your office and says, your numbers are down for the third quarter in a row. Are you okay? I'm worried about you. What's going on? We all have performance issues. Maybe someone's kid is sick. Maybe they're having problems in their marriage. Maybe one of their parents is dying. We don't know what's going on in their lives. And of course it will affect performance at work. Empathy is being concerned about the human being, not just their output.
Where to start? There's so much wrong with this. Mostly though, it's that he simply doesn't understand the meaning of the word. What Sinek has described here is sympathy, or just being understanding. He wants us to figure out the root cause of people's poor performance. That's fine, but you don't need to feel what they are feeling in order to do that. I'd suggest that would be more of a hindrance than a help, as you're now both in the hole. Oh, and he also foreshadows a bigger problem that I'll get to in a bit, but spoiler alert, if you've not met your number for 3 consecutive quarters, that's 9 months, then me feeling your personal pain would be a bad thing for the future of the entity I'm running that has to support more than just one individual. And Gary Vaynerchuk, he's no better. Listen to him.
You know, let's get the elephant out of the room. I literally named my wine project, and you can imagine, if you know anything about me, my wine project really means a lot to me and will historically and forever be in my heart and soul. And I named it empathy, so you can imagine what I think about this word.
All right. Beautiful, Gary. But let's see what he thinks about this actually. I found an article in which he described empathy as follows. The best salespeople are the ones who realize the incredible power of empathy and can understand the other party without them explicitly stating it. I don't know why, that's my Gary V impersonation. For instance, the majority of my clients' representatives won't say what they really want. Empathy allows me to figure out what they are actually trying to accomplish. I know that when a client's brand manager says that they want more likes on Facebook, not only do they mean they want to blow their competition out of the water on a corporate level, but they're also looking to advance their own careers via my successful strategy. Bro, that's not even empathy. It's not even sympathy. It's intuition or experience. For fuck's sakes.
That makes sense.
If you're still skeptical, take a moment, pause the video, do your research, then come back. Once we've agreed that empathy is about feeling what others feel, we can explain why this might not be as advantageous as you think for effective leadership and life generally. All right, welcome back. If you're still here, we have reached consensus, or at least agreed to suspend our disbelief for a while.
Keeping an open mind.
Now, let me explain why then empathy is often a suboptimal strategy, particularly for leaders. The first thing we need to consider is the mindset of the empathy giver. Is feeling what other people feel actually a good thing for leaders and people in general? Well, the data says no.
Computer says no.
A study done by leading neuroscientist and empathy researcher Tanya Singer, along with Mathieu Ricard, discovered that people found acts of empathy to be largely draining. The reason being, and this was studied under fMRI, was that when we have empathy, we really are feeling and sharing their pain as if it was our own. People found that this led to empathy fatigue and burnout, which kind of makes sense, right? Have you ever been around one of those people and they're draining and they're tiring and you go home and you feel drained and tired as well? Take this clip of Ricard to see what he has to say about it.
So we got the idea together that there's no such thing as compassion fatigue, but only empathy fatigue. And that stand-alone empathy, just empathy, leads to burnout. But if you have empathy within the vaster sphere of loving kindness and compassion, then you have the whole buffer of this compassion that prevents all the negative effect of feeling the other side.
Now, this next story is anecdotal, so bear that in mind when I tell you it, but I remember being really profoundly moved by it. So a friend of my wife took his life last year. It was terrible. And we're at his memorial and everyone was invited to share their own memories. Person after person stood up and spoke about what an amazing listener he was. People would always go to him when they had problems and he just listened with empathy. And when they left, they always felt better. And I know why. I drove home that night firmly believing that that poor guy carried everyone else's pain for them and eventually broke under the pressure. Guys, life is difficult. Our own lives are truly enough of a struggle for us without emotionally burdening ourselves with the pain of others. And it turns out as well that the opposing strategy, which is sharing love and compassion, which gets the same results from the receiver, has a different impact on the giver. That's you. Instead of going home exhausted from empathy, according to the above research, you go home exhilarated because you've actually helped. There are other ways to be a good leader and a good person. Look, isn't it one hell of a coincidence that the last decade you have heard a correlated and dramatic increase in the popularity of the term empathy, as well as the instances of reported depression and mental health issues? If you walk around emotionally appropriating everyone else's pain, and let's be honest, there's a large vocal subset of social media that is dedicated to doing just this. And by the way, as an aside, it shows a shadow side of empathy, which is that studies have suggested that empathy, while well-intentioned, isn't neutral. It's even suggested that it can sometimes hurt more than it helps our relationships and our ability to lead effectively. Why? Well, you see, empathy can make us unconsciously more sympathetic towards individuals we relate to more. This makes us less likely to connect with people whose experiences don't mirror ours. If you want some proof of this, just pop into social media quickly and have a look at the empathy given to Israelis by Free Palestine supporters. It's close to non-existent. And of course, it works the other way, right? That's because empathy comes from a feeling of sameness. Being human is a good starting point, but from there, biases are impossible to avoid. Anyway, where was I? Yes. Keep feeling what others are feeling and you will be worse off. So likely will they. I mean, imagine a therapist that was overly empathetic. They die. A therapist can and probably should feel objective compassion for people and have an understanding of what they are going through. But they need to do that without sharing their patient's pain. In researching this video, I came across a guy called Paul Bloom. He's the author of the book Against Empathy. And he had this to say about that.
Think about what you want from a doctor or a therapist. You want them to understand you. You want them to care about you. But do you want them to feel your pain, feel your suffering? On the one hand, if they do so, they'll be exhausted. They'll suffer from burnout. If a therapist sees a series of patients for 50 minutes each day and she feels their depression, their anxiety, their fear, their anguish, she wouldn't make it through a week. But more than that, it would make them less effective at what they do.
If empathy was the only way to help people, psychologists would have to be either useless or suicidal, and surgeons would go absolutely mental. As a leader, when my team is struggling, it's not my job to feel what they are feeling. How can I remain rational and useful if I did that? It's my job to listen and to deal with the issues as pragmatically and compassionately as the situation deserves. Let's take a topic that's often avoided, yet crucial to discuss. As the leader of a company that's been honored with several Best Employer awards and lauded globally for our work culture, I understand the importance of employee well-being. However, we must remember businesses fundamentally exist to fulfill a collective craft, not primarily as a service organization for staff well-being. This is a byproduct of great companies, but not their core purpose. Take, ironically, Simon Sinek's example when an employee underperforms for 9 months. As harsh as it may sound, the right leadership decision in this case would be to part ways with them, provided all efforts to improve and their performance have been exhausted. This isn't about a lack of empathy, it's about safeguarding the organization and all of its employees, not just the few who struggle. This brings us to a critical dilemma in leadership, and that is that empathy doesn't scale. Our role as leaders is to protect the entire organization. In her book, Radical Candor, Kim Scott highlights ruinous empathy as a detrimental leadership trait. Because if you get caught up with the individual all the time and you're always trying to be there for them, it can lead to you never actually taking the tough steps that you need to take and holding them back from their own value and potential. And here's an uncomfortable truth. Often, the most groundbreaking work, the work that actually people will write about in their memoirs, is driven by those who are prioritizing the pursuit of excellence and pushing boundaries over individual emotional comfort. And whether or not that approach gives us the warm and fuzzies, our actions from queuing for their products to investing in their stocks reveals our implicit endorsement. Okay though, while I've highlighted the risks of overvaluing empathy in leadership, I am obviously not completely against it and recognize the role in certain contexts. Empathy is a component within the wide spectrum of emotional intelligence, helpful for specific dynamics, but it's not the panacea that we're being told it is. And that is my point. The key is discerning when empathy aids and when it hinders. It's not about a constant balance, but about understanding its effectiveness in certain situations. Look, let's face it. We have been sold a narrative of empathy that is more style than substance, and it's time to challenge it. Leadership isn't about riding the emotional roller coaster with every team member. It's about standing at the control panel, making the tough calls with a clear head and a compassionate heart. We need to shift our focus from an overindulgence in empathy, often leaving us paralyzed in a quagmire of feelings, to a more pragmatic approach rooted in compassion and action. Leave the excess empathy to the crystal wearers and the armchair philosophers. The real world, the world in which decisions have consequences and actions speak louder than feelings, calls for leaders who can show compassion when necessary, especially when making tough decisions, but that can rise above it to see the bigger picture when necessary. It also calls for leaders, by the way, who don't just regurgitate the drivel they read and hear on LinkedIn without properly thinking about it. We just accepted this empathy narrative without giving it a second thought. So, leaders, lead with practical compassion, but keep a safe distance. You are not their friend or their psychologist. Protect yourself and remember that your responsibility is for the collective, not just the individuals. Now, if you do have any empathy for me at all, you'll like this video, you'll comment on it, and even if you disagree, you'll share it with all your friends. Because that's what empathetic leaders do.